Hello friends, welcome to Data Pandit. Today we are going to talk about metaprogramming in Abinitio. So metaprogramming is a happening topic when we consider Abinitio interview questions or Abinitio discussion. So let's talk about metaprogramming today, and we are going to solve a simple use case. Though it's a simple, but it's going to be a foundation for larger complex scenarios which you can solve based on these discussion. Okay. So let's talk about a scenario wherein we have been provided one data manipulation language, I mean DML file. We have one DML file, and best out of it, we need to produce a certain output DML. So that input DML looks like this, and we are going to produce a output DML as well as the transformation XFR. Okay, using this DML. So it's the DML driven graph processing. So mostly these metaprogramming is used in generic graphs whenever we have certain types of inputs and we need to build a graph, which could be driven by parameters. So uh, there will be a p sets over the graph, and p set would be based on, I mean, different DMLs probably, and depending on those DMLs or output DMLs would be constructed, and the underlying XFR needs to be generated and dynamically. So what we are going to do is we are going to create graph level, I mean pset level parameters, and the XFR and in the XFR and the output DML and other DML which are used in the graph will be referenced by those parameters. Okay, so let's see. I mean, this is going to be our input DML, and let's suppose that we are going to produce the output DML as like this. Okay, and we are going to produce the XFR like this. Okay, so this is a simple use case, and we are going to talk about what are all we need to do to achieve this. Okay, yeah. So first of all, we are going to create the certain parameters. Okay, so let's suppose this is the our input DML file, and first parameter we are going to create is a constant interpreted parameter, which is input DML. We are going to accept the that file name as it is, and then we are going to create one PDL, read type that DML, and that DML type we are going to read, and we are going to produce one more parameter which will have ab initio readable record format in the input DML info parameters. Okay, then we are going to prepare the Abdml definition. So this is an inbuilt parameter of ab initio which will have which will be containing a PDL and having many functions. So we can define the DML functions over here within the body of ABDML definitions, and this is a dynamic definitions, and these can be these functions or types which we are going to include in ABDML definition can be called further from any other parameter creation. Okay, so we are going to create this parameter. This is also a parameter which is PDL interpreted, and within the PDL interpreted body, we are going to produce few functions which are going to help us to create the DMLs and XFRs. Okay, so the body would contain, I mean, these two or three functions. First is dynamic DML generation function, and second is dynamic DML function, and the third one would be a dynamic transform function. So these three functions we are going to create in every DML definitions, and all the functions which we are going to define over here can be called from other further parameters. So see, I am going to create another parameter within the same graph level parameter. Okay, and which is calling this dynamic DML generation function while passing the input parameter as a input DML definition. This is also as a PDL interpreted parameters. And further, I'm going to create output DML, and I'm going to call a dynamic DML function having the output DML info as a parameter, and so on for the uh, XFR as well. So this is going to be a whole high-level structure of this parameter set, which is going to be created upon a certain generic graph. So let's talk about in deep regarding a few functions available in metaprogramming, and how we are going to utilize those functions to construct output DML based on input DML. So this is going to be first function, dynamic DML generation, which is getting input DML info. This type definition of input DML. Okay, so this is we are going to accept in record, and we have these many fields and all. So first function which we are going to call as in the uh, library of metaprogramming, library, is record info. So the record info would be giving as a vector of all the fields definition, actually. Field info vec, DML info, record info, and we are passing the DML, DML type. Okay. So this will give the vector of all the fields definition. So how the DML field info vec will look like is, let's look up to the this I have created one file which contains the structure of these types, actually. So DML field info vec. So how a DML field info would look like is, so this will look like this. So this will have these many attributes for a certain field. So the name of the attribute, DML type of the attribute, the default value of the attribute, whether it's a nullable, whether null flag is defined or not, what is the condition. So condition is for we will talk about a conditional DML in one of the session. Then we are going to discuss what is the meaning of condition. So let's assume that if it is a conditional field based on certain outside condition. Okay, so if that is there, then this needs to be set for this particular field within the record. And what is the form is kind of a DML type itself, actually, whether it's a string or a vector or a decimal integer, and so on. So for each and every field which is as part of our DML, right? So let's talk about age field. If we are talk about age field, so age field will have these many attributes associated with it. So what is the name of the age field, which is age? What is the DML type of age field is decimal, and what is the default value of age field is, there is no default value. Actually, it's a not nullable field, so there is no SS. And null level is not, it's not a nullable field. Null flag is also not there. Whether is the conditional not specified, and what is the form is decimal. So these all are attributes. So whenever we call the function record info function, it is going to be give the vector of all the fields within that particular DML, and in the vector form. So this is one element of that particular vector. Okay. So likewise, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements within that DML field info vec. Okay, so that we can reference all the fields, all the properties of these fields, and we can construct another DML, right, based on that. Okay, then I'm going to create one integer field which is going to be a number of fields. So in this case, there will be a 7, I think, 1, 2, 3, 8 fields. So the number of fields is going to be 8. Length of DML info, length of this vector. So this is going to be 8. And DML field info, I'm going to create one empty vector, which is we are going to enrich while within this function. Okay, we are going to populating one by one while iterating to a for loop. So I'm going to iterate the for loop. So how many times I need to iterate the for loop is 7 times, because my number of fields, right? So all the number of fields I'm going to scan one by one, and I'm going to produce the output field, and I would check that whether I need that field into the output DML or not. If it is not needed, then I will be skipping it. Otherwise, I'm going to add that field into the output. So let's have a look at the output DML. So until joining it, I need all the fields. Then I have until mobile number, I need those all the fields, these 6 fields, and then these 2 fields I'm going to these are not in the input DML, right? So, but I am going to drop this DL number and passport number from this input DML. I'm going to drop 2 fields. I'm going to add 2 more fields. So this is my output DML is different from the input DML basically. But initial 6 fields are same. So I'm going to scan all the fields in the input DML using this for iteration, and I'm going to check whether uh, so this is the whether the particular field is there in that or not. Otherwise, I'm going to skip it. Otherwise, I'm going to append it. Okay. So let's talk iterate through from using the for loop begin end. Okay. If is defined, if DML info name, DML info is this vector. Okay. Name is the property. I'm talking about property of the field. So name would give the name for my first element. The DML field info name is name. So name is vector is a member of vector DL number and passport number. If it is part of DL number or passport number, then I'm going to skip it. Otherwise, I'm going to add it. So I'm checking not condition over here. If this is a DL number and passport number, I'm not going to add that those element into the output DML info vector. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to add it. So while adding it, so this is vector append function, which is going to append the vector in the empty vector one by one. And while creating another vector, I'm going to call the makefield function. So makefield function will be creating a field which has all these attributes, these all attributes. Okay. So I'm going to pass all these attributes into the makefield. While calling the mat field, I'm going to pass all those parameters. If I'm not passing all those parameters, that means these are kind of default parameters. So there are required parameters while calling the Mac field, or default parameters. Okay. So there are optional parameters and required parameters. So DML info name is required parameter in the type. DML info type is also required parameter. DML type, and I should say DML type, not a type. So these 2 parameters, so in first case, while calling function for the first element name is the value would be name and string. Okay. So the my vector is going to be created by this you know so DML field info will be created by using, okay, and while calling the append vector info vec is going to be appended one by one. So at the end of the iteration of these all the elements of the DML info, I will have 2 more elements to add. So one by one, I'm going to add. So I'm DML output DML info vector append out DML info I have created using those 6 elements I have already and up till here, and I'm going to add one more, which is address, and address is going to be a string, as we know in output DML, and it's a string kind of, and it's what is the third third element is default. There won't be any default value, so I'm going to specify null string. Then nullable, yeah, it is nullable. So if I give null flag as one, that means it's a nullable, and then string, a form is string. So similarly, the year part is I'm also going to be appending. So and with that, our DML info vec is constructed, and I'm going to be out specifying into the out So I'm returning this output DML info back using using this function. Okay. So my first DML part is that function is created. Okay, so whenever I will call this function, right, output DML info, I would be calling output DML gen, input DML info I'm going to pass, and my interpretation would be PDL interpreted. So I will have output DML info, and then this will be creating the type of the DML. Then I'm going to create as a file. So I'm going to pass this in dynamic DML and output DML info type I'm going to pass, and this is another this one another function available in output in DML definitions. Okay, so this will also have output DML info back, out DML info, out DML info. Okay. Then add fields. There is another metaprogramming function which is called add field and add fields. So if I'm going to specify add fields in the sense of this is a series of fields. So output DML info is containing series of fields, right? So record and end. So this will give me complete definition of any record format. Okay. So the all the fields would be specified in between record and end. So likewise, I'm going to return as a DML file, output DML file. So this is how we are going to create the DML output DML. Now let's talk about how we are going to construct the def transform function out of it. So let's talk about it. So the dynamic transform function, which is defined in Abdml definition, is going to accept two parameters: output DML and input DML and output DML. So let's talk about the definition of it. Okay. So here also we will have we are going to understand few types which are availed by metaprogramming library, and also few more functions which we are going to understand. So metaprogramming is nothing, you need to understand certain types and functions, and based on that we can build much more complex logic, complex program basically, depending upon the requirement. So let's create XFR. So my XFR output XFR looks like this. Whenever we talk about XFR, so there are three things commonly would be there in the XFR. So there will be variables, okay, whether it's a assigned variable or whether it's a not assigned variable. Then there will be statements, and then there will be assignments, rules. So these are the three, major construct or major constituent of any reformat or any XFR function, okay, and XFR. So we are going to construct one by one the variable vector and the statement vector and the rule vector. So these are the three vector we are going to declare. So if you look at this definition, so I'm going to call the record info first, DML info back, and DML info back out, DML info output DML info I'm going to assign, and input DML info I'm going to assign. Okay, and then number of fields I'm going to calculate using the output DML. Okay. Okay. Why I created this number of fields using the output DML is because we want as many fields in the XFR as we have in the output DML, right? So therefore I have created this number of fields using the output DML info, right? Then I'm going to call three empty vectors for each for one rule vector and statement vector and variable vector. Okay. So first is going to be a variable vector which will contain the definition of all the variables which we are going to declare as part of that particular function or XFR. Then then there will be a statement vector. Whether I have any statement vector in the sense of for loop statement or a if statement or any other statement which we are going to be there specified. Okay. And then there is a priority. So we have a priority when we define rules. So we will have priority also, right? So whenever we specify out dot name, we are specify like this rule, priority 1, 2, or default properties, right? So, incidentally, for this XFR, I do not have statement vector. So, I'm going to, we will understand what is the statement vector, but I'm not going to populate that statement vector as part of the definition of this dynamic, transform. So, let's create these variable vectors. So, let's look at the type definition of these vectors, variable vectors. Let's go to this document. So DML variable vec. So whenever we talk about any variable in certain XFR, so there will be a certain attributes for a particular variable. So there will be a name of that variable. There will be a DML type of that variable. What is the initial value of that particular variable, and what is the comment? So when we talk about comment, so certain